Welcome to ChiroSphere, where we talk about all things chiropractic and some things not so chiropractic, and that's likely to happen today. I'm Dr. Ray Foxworth, your host for ChiroSphere and CEO of ChiroHealth USA, the network that works for chiropractic. Today, we're honored to have one of the most influential voices in chiropractic research and education join us, Dr. Heidi Haavik, and I learned how to pronounce that about 2 minutes ago. Dr. Haavik is an accomplished chiropractor with over 20 years of clinical experience and a renowned neurophysiologist who earned her PhD from the University of Auckland in 2008. As a vice president of research and dean of research at the New Zealand College of Chiropractic, she founded the Center for Chiropractic Research, leading innovative studies that bridge chiropractic care and neuroscience. She's the author of The Reality Check, A Quest to Understand Chiropractic from the Inside Out, a book that delves into what happens in the brain during chiropractic adjustments. Her groundbreaking research has been published extensively and shared on stages across the globe, from neuroscience conferences to chiropractic forums. Dr. Havik's influence extends to her role as research workgroup chair for the Chiropractic Future Strategic Plan, shaping the profession's path forward. Welcome, Dr. Heidi.
Yay! And thanks, Ray, for having me.
Absolutely. And as we found out a few moments ago, I found out that having a neuroscience degree doesn't mean that you can make your speakers work.
No, I've got this fabulous microphone. I plug that in and then I can't hear you.
Well, welcome to my world.
Oh, thank you. No, pleasure to be here.
You know, it's one thing to pursue a degree in chiropractic. It's something else to do it, if I understand this correctly, to pursue a PhD in human neurophysiology. Did you do that at the same time?
No, I did that after I graduated as a chiropractor. I think it would have been a bit too much to do it at the same time because
you're an overachiever if that's the case.
But we were actually doing our bachelor's degree at the same time as chiropractic. And then I continued on and did a postgraduate diploma, which is equivalent to a master's degree, again, while finishing off chiropractic college. So, and that was just the way it was set up in New Zealand at the time. They've changed it now, funnily enough. They sort of found out that it was a little bit too much to do 2 degrees at the same time, oddly enough. And now it's separate. But then, yeah, I continued straight after my chiropractic degree. So while I was practicing, I had a little son. He was about 3 years old, and I was pregnant with my daughter. I started a PhD, Ray, because it's no big deal, right?
No, not at all. Yeah, that's the normal path everyone takes, Heidi.
No. Yeah, no, it was madness, Ray. It really was. So oddly enough, I divorced, about 4 or 5 years later. So it was insane. Yeah. But I don't know what drove me. I was just I've always been deeply interested in how it works, because I've seen it work, right? I've been a chiropractor. I've practiced, I've watched kids, animals, adults change dramatically. And then I just have this deep burning desire to understand why. And I happen to have a brain that can do that kind of game, that I can play that game of science. I understand the rules. I can design the studies. I can collect the data. I'm not so good at collecting the data. You've seen my technological skills. They have limits.
You have people for that, I'm sure.
Well, I mean, honestly, Ray, when I hired my first bioengineer, Dr. Imran Khanliatzi, it was a life changer for me. So he sort of took over the data, the collection and the analysis. Because again, stuff that took me like 6 to 9 months to, literally analyze these little squiggles that you get from EEG recordings or brainwaves. Honestly, he could do it in a week. And now he's got tools, he can do it in days. Like, it's insane. So yeah, we're a really good team. So I can design the studies I want to do, and then, Imran will take over and get the data collected and analyzed, and then I can help, interpret and write up what it is that we found and what does that mean and how do we understand that. And then I've had this real passion for translating it as well, so that normal human beings,
there go the book.
They, and even chiropractors. I mean, most chiropractors aren't interested in science. You hear the word science and research and you just want to go to sleep, but it's actually really exciting. And so being able to translate it so it makes sense to a normal chiropractor or a normal patient, I actually really enjoy that part. So, yeah.
So you get your chiropractic degree, and clearly, as we all did, or most of us, we go out and we start practicing it, and we do see what we would consider the miracles of chiropractic, and sometimes miracle could just simply means we don't know how to explain it yet. So give me an example of something that you learned in chiropractic college about how it worked and something you found out later that said, well, no, that's not quite true.
Well, we were taught at chiropractic school that what we're actually doing is taking pressure off these squat nerve roots that exit the spine, all the nerve roots that exit the spine. And when we adjust subluxations, supposedly the misalignment's squashing the nerve root, then we take pressure off it. And really interesting, right from our early experiments, and we're talking graduated in 99. So I started, early 2000s with my postgraduate and PhD work. We found right from those early days that, well, for one, there were no changes at the spinal cord. There were no changes in the brainstem, but there were these quite dramatic major changes up in the cortex in the brain. So, and this just kept going, and we repeated it, and we repeated it. We repeated it with different technology. If you're genuinely changing the brain, then that should also show up if we did use this technology or that technology. And it did. So it just kept changing. And then we were reading through all the animal experiments that have also been done looking at nerve root pressure. And to actually fully interfere with those nerve roots, you actually need quite a lot of pressure. You need so much pressure that you end up in that radiating pain that, you've seen patients with, actual true nerve root radiating pain, right? I mean, I've seen grown men carried in crying in pain. It's really dramatic. Can't put weight bear, all that sort of stuff. So it became relatively clear relatively quickly that we're not actually taking pressure off nerve roots. You can have squash nerve roots. We know that, but it's quite rare. It follows those people that come in with that radiating, the pain also.
About 10% of chiropractors actually.
Yeah, it's there, right? So it's not that it's not there, but what about the other 90%, all the others that are subluxated? And so what we saw right from early on is that this is some communication pathway, and it took us a while to figure out what that might be then, is interfering with the brain's ability to understand what's going on in the body and the world around it. And when we're adjusting you, we're actually clearing up that communication pathway. So, I mean, that to me was quite big, and I knew it right from those early days. I could see, like I had a computer going, at the time when I managed to get it going, you know me in computers now already, right? And I had all my channels, and I could see the changes happening at the brain level. And I stood there, I was rocking my, newborn baby daughter. I had a a subject with a full cap on and, all the rest of it. And I could see the brain channels changing. And I knew that this was going to change chiropractic.
Well,
so it's a weird feeling, knowing that, many scientists, I mean, it's like they're either doing something meaningless or they're not known until, after they pass on. But I was too excited about this and had to share.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because clearly our profession has different concepts about chiropractic, differences of opinions about how it works, when it should be applied, et cetera, and they kind of fall in the camps of more philosophically based or more evidence-based. And have you found in your research that the things that you are finding, how do I want to phrase this? Are the things that you're finding reinforcing what chiropractors have thought for years, or would you consider it, we had no idea this is what was occurring? So is it been reinforcing or more enlightening?
No, because I can't really I meet thousands of chiropractors, as you know, and most chiropractors I meet, are overwhelmingly positive about it. This is unbelievable. This is fantastic. It matches everything we see in practice, because it does actually explain so much. I've practiced myself, so I understand. I know how many questions it answers, or how many aspects of chiropractic care that it actually answers. It's not, funnily enough, right? The people that don't seem to like it very much and seem to, be unhappy with it are the actual evidence-based people, which is really odd, since that was, my camp. That's where I came from, But, you can't choose your data. And I understand it's quite new, and it's a different story to the one that they've been telling and want to tell. And so, oddly enough, I've found most resistance within the evidence-based realm, and they seem to be so hung up on their own story that they can't let the truth come and interfere with that little story that they prefer. But I don't choose my data. So, it is what it is. Luckily, I never really cared. Like when I went in looking to try and understand how does chiropractic work, I didn't actually give a shit what the answer really was. It didn't matter to me. I'd seen it work, but I didn't understand how. And I knew from those early days, those early experiments, that it was directly impacting the brain, and I just wanted to understand it. So, and I suppose that's a blessing because I had no preconceived ideas. It didn't matter to me. But yeah, most practicing chiropractors seem to absolutely love it because it gives them answers to what they see in practice and have seen for their entire lifetime practicing. And that to me, Ray, I think is a real, it matters more to me than anything because they're the ones at the coalface. They're the ones actually taking care of patients. And if it answers their questions, then I'm delighted,
That's awesome.
Bugger the people that can't manage to accept what's happening. And again, it's not unusual. And you find with new novel science, it takes like 20, 30 years for it to become accepted. And that's fair enough. They're bright people. And so it's probably quite hard for bright people to change the story, that or admit that they were wrong. I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you what's been, for me, very enjoyable to see over the years. My mother and father were both chiropractors, so I've grown up around this my entire life. And, even as a kid in their practice and hearing them talk about some of the outcomes that they had, it's like, well, how the hell does that work? There were several times, I remember a mom or dad saying, well, I don't understand all I know about it, but I know that it works. That doesn't mean I'm going to stop doing it because, let's face it, even anecdotal evidence is a level of evidence. And,
Yes.
Sometimes, hell, go look at on some of the prescriptions that are out there. They don't know what the mechanism of action is, but they know that they get a positive outcomes. So that's where I kind of get hung up sometimes on, well, you can only do what there is this level of evidence to do. I understand the concept.
That's not right.
Yeah.
That's actually not right, Ray.
Well,
When David Sackett said that was not the way it's meant to be done. And what's really interesting when you look at David Sackett's model of evidence-based practice, which is what you're talking about, you're meant to take into account the latest science, but you're also meant to take into account equally your clinical experience. And equally important, what the patient wants. So it's meant to be a blend of those three things. And there's a lot of science. I'm way behind the eight ball. There's so much we haven't done yet. So your clinical experience is equally important, same as patient preferences. So chiropractors have been very evidence-based. They just don't know that they've been evidence-based. And if anything, they've almost been a bit put off by the evidence because of those stupid people that bastardize that evidence-based practice into being you're only allowed to do what we've got double, triple blinded studies that says we can do, which is not the case. Half of medicine is not evident. It's not got double blinded trials. Triple bypasses. Do you think there's who's volunteer to what? Control to me.
Jeez, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So in your book, you the reality check, you explain what happens in the brain during a chiropractic adjustment. So kind of give me the top 2 or 3 things that we can share with the audience of what actually happens when we deliver an adjustment to the spine. And I'm going to ask this part because I heard you talk about it and I think people need to hear it. We've heard from the old days, if all else fails, hit them in the ass with a snow shovel. In other words, get movement in the spine. We've advanced way beyond that, just in case anybody's wondering. But how important is the segment?
Yeah. So let me back up first and go to what have we discovered about the subluxation? Because I think, and then we can talk about what happens when you adjust it, because that specificity might be the most important thing, even though there's no clinical trials for it yet too. So if we need to go there, then we need to discuss what's basic science and what's clinical science. And let's start there. So just a real low level, what's basic science and what's clinical science? Clinical science is about looking at what treatment helps what conditions, right? So I never really bothered with that because I wasn't really after treating anything. I was really after what happens when you check and adjust subluxations in the spine, right? So, but chiropractic care can help people with back pain, neck pain, headaches, bedwetting, high blood pressure. We know but that's the clinical realm. So if we back up a little bit and look at, so my research world, what I've been most interested in is basic science, because it's looking at what is something and what's the mechanism of some intervention. So I was specifically after, what is a subluxation? What are the key components to a subluxation having a detrimental impact on our health? Like, that's sort of where I started way back. And we were looking at that because if it's not the squash nerve root, Ray, what is it, right? So then we started to look at, okay, well, what is it around that tissue that does communicate with the brain? Because we knew it was a direct brain conversation that was going on. I could see that. I could literally see that on my subjects in the experiments. So what it appears to be that's key, that communication, is when you get subluxated, and you can get subluxated, isn't it so funny? I did a review in 2021 looking at, again, I've written about all of this, and I can pop the reference to that if anyone wants to read it, because it's an open access journal article. What causes a subluxation, Ray? I mean, what have you always been told?
Typically trauma.
Trauma, toxins, and thoughts, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That's exactly what we find in the literature. Physical injury, going into fight and flight, to psychological distress like fight and flight, and local inflammation. So I just think that's really hilarious. But anyway, what happens is that the trauma, toxins, and thoughts stop the communication from the small, deep paraspinal muscles and the brain. So they're the little muscles that cross the individual vertebra, individual bones, just in case there's non-chiros listening. And those little muscles, they're really close to the spine, and they cross individual segments, one or two at a time. And they're not really there to move the bones. They're actually there to sense what's going on and tell the brain what's going on, so that the brain can control the movement of those bones appropriately. And this is where it gets interesting, because with the trauma, toxins, and thoughts, these little muscles get turned off. It's called neural inhibition in the research world. And then those muscles can atrophy. So when we're talking a subluxation, we've got to really consider the lifespan of that subluxation as well. Because if you've got subluxated today, you might have this neural communication issue. But if that subluxation's been there for a month, 2 months, 6 months, a year, you start to get changes in the paraspinal tissue. So those little muscles, they atrophy, like they literally shrink. They become stiff, fibrotic. You get a lot of fatty infiltration. They even become dulled. So their ability to communicate is changed as well. So subluxation's not the same if it was caused today or if it was there for 2 years. And I think that's really quite key as well. And chiros know this. And normally when you start working on someone, you know that they've been subluxated for years. And oddly enough, that's why it takes time to work on them. Because if you've ever tried exercising a muscle that has been unused for a long time, what do we notice? We notice you get a little bit sore and achy. Well, that's a typical side effect of getting adjusted, right? We know that we've got to usually exercise 3 or 4 times a week, regularly over several months. That's exactly what we're finding in the chiropractic literature, that the people that get adjusted, more frequently and for longer term. And then it comes to your first question, which is, what are the changes taking place in the brain? Well, it seems that communication from the spine represents the core of your body, and the core of your body is essential for a lot of things. It's essentially the awareness of where you are in space. So when you think about moving arms and legs, your brain doesn't just send messages, randomly to arms and legs. It needs to take into account that your arm is attached to the core of your body. Your leg is attached to the core of your body. So when it's sending messages to arms and legs, it needs to know where you are. It's that spinal information is absolutely essential for your body awareness and your body to be able to send appropriate moving messages to muscles. But it gets even more freaky. Well, I call it freaky because it's those things that are hard to explain, right? We've even done experiments with sound and visual information. And when you adjust subluxations in the spine, it enables your brain to more accurately interpret sound and visual information. And again, this probably comes down to your spine representing the core of your body. So if you've heard a sound and your brain is trying to interpret where's that coming from, well, you kind of need to know where you are to interpret where it's coming from. And we're thinking that's why, because it's not that we're changing the information that goes in the ears and goes to the primary auditory cortex of your brain, but it's when your brain's trying to interpret it. And I know this because I've actually measured the sensory processing really, really early on. And it's not really the sensory processing that's changing. It's once it gets to the brain and then onwards. So it's once the sensory information, comes to the brain and starts to get processed as to what do I mean? How do we interpret this? Is it something I need to do about it? It's that interpretation that the brain does. So in a very simple model, and we call it the brain model of chiropractic, subluxation interferes with your brain's ability to accurately interpret what's going on inside your body and in your environment around you. Because we know that from sound and visual information. Haven't done taste and smell yet, but I've talked to, again, hundreds of chiropractors that tell me, especially after COVID, actually, that when they're adjusting their patients, their taste and smell comes back. So, it's anecdotal, but it's my world, right? I've got to just design the studies and find the money and actually get onto it. But that's the simple story about what happens in the brain. The brain becomes more accurately aware of what's going on inside you and around you. It can interpret it more accurately, and therefore it can control it better. And then, so then it comes back to that specificity question that you asked. If we're just randomly, manipulating joints, I don't think it has the same outcome as when you're actually targeting the subluxated segment where you've had the atrophy and the dysfunction in the paraspinal tissues. And we actually did a study on that, looking at these neurophysiological outcomes. And we didn't get the changes in the neurophysiological outcomes when we manipulated a healthy joint or a freely moving, fine, okay joint, compared to when we applied that force to the subluxated segment, where there was changes in the intersegmental range of motion, tenderness to touch, stiff fibrotic little muscles around it that we can palpate. So it's really, really interesting. It's early days. And again, we have to do the bigger clinical trial studies to actually see whether a period of chiropractic care when we're actually adjusting subluxations versus manipulating healthy joints, to then look at the clinical outcomes. But, we're trying as hard and as fast as we can. It's just held back with some funds.
Yeah. Follow the dollar, they say. Well, hang tight. Yeah. Hang tight while we take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. Welcome back to our podcast with Dr. Heidi. So I have another question for you. I know you've lectured in the chiropractic community, but also in the broader scientific community to neuroscience groups. How is the work that you're doing about chiropractic being received by the neuroscience community?
Absolutely no problems there. No problems whatsoever. It's really bizarre. I have trouble when I'm in front of chiropractors, not general chiropractors. It's really bizarre. The neuroscience community, probably because they understand neuroscience, right? It's like I'm interpreting the neuroscience findings according to how a neuroscientist would interpret it, and they get it. I talked to a neuroscientist to explain that, chiropractic care must have this neuroplastic effect and, improve the ability to multimodally integrate. And they're like, yeah, according to that data, that makes sense. Honestly, within minutes. It's really, really interesting. Do they take it on board and see the big picture? Probably not. But the reason I continue to go to these neuroscience communities, Ray, is to make sure that I am, up to date with the latest neuroscience technology and methodology, that I'm interpreting things appropriately. Because if I was misinterpreting my data, they would, bring me up immediately. And that's what's so key to me, because if it all my methods, I go to the neuroscience community. Am I doing this correctly? Am I interpreting it accurately? They might come up with, well, it could be that they are feeling more confident. And I'm like, no, that's true.
Yep.
So, and then we write that into our articles. That's why I get slightly different. Obviously, I'm biased, I think that's what's so funny. Scientists are supposed to not be biased, right? Well, we're human beings. And I've actually found the chiropractic scientific community to be the most biased people on the planet. But anyway, we won't go there. Oh, well, we have already gone there a couple of times. So no, it's fascinating. Yeah. But again, I'm not going to stop going to the neuroscience communities. And I speak in front of physios and doctors and psychologists. And I mean, it must make a difference, but it's a bit like, adjusting one spine at a time. I'm literally talking to then a couple of hundred people at a time. Are they taking it on board? I'm hoping they are, and we'll see. But at least that accurate model or science is being discussed. And hopefully they'll start thinking about it. Because, like, for example, Ray, we've done research in stroke populations, so stroke survivors. And what we're showing in like both clinical trials and basic science studies is that chiropractic should really be part of the rehabilitation protocols for these stroke survivors, because they have better functional outcomes when you include chiropractic care. And they have, so it's like, well, the stroke
Instead of blaming us for strokes, how about incorporate treatment after the stroke?
Yeah, because the patients do better, like they have better outcomes. So it's really interesting. But of course, again, that's a very long held belief in the, neurosurgeon community that we cause strokes. Because, if all you ever do is hammer nails, all you see is, a nail. If you have a hammer and, everything is a nail, right? So to them, it's been a very long-standing belief. And there's studies written about that too, actually, to show us that it's a bias in their understanding, because the science is very clear. We don't cause strokes any more than, backing your car or painting your ceiling. So it's like, duh. But anyway, those conversations with these guys too, it's really rather interesting. But so it's a slow process. Again, probably because there's so few of us, and even our own scientific community is struggling with, these findings. Although it's really interesting because you start getting into this too, Ray, and it's fascinating because all of the, like even the chronic pain literature now, it's like it literally fits with a hand in a glove with the chiropractic subluxation model. And there are pain specialists that are arguing that what's causing all the drama in the brain, people with chronic pain, there's a lot of changes that have taken place in the brain. And some of the pain specialists are now saying that they actually suspect it's alterations in the proprioceptive input from the paraspinal tissues. Well, in our world, that's a subluxation. It's an alteration in the proprioceptive information, the communication from those little muscles around the spine to the brain. And so it's like, yeah, that's exactly what we're saying, which again comes back to your specificity question then. Well, of course, you have to be adjusting those segments that are causing the wrong communication, the faulty proprioceptive input to the brain, that's then causing all the brain changes that is responsible for this chronic problem. It's really interesting when you start looking at it.
No doubt. So as a research work group chair for the Chiropractic Future Strategic Plan, which we're a part of and support, what are your goals for advancing chiropractic research? And why you're a busy lady. Why are you spending the time dealing with a strategic plan and so intent on making sure that research is one of those pillars? What do you see it doing for us down the line?
Everything.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a nice day.
Yeah, exactly. I think the group, Ray, is incredible. And it has to be a united group where research is one pillar, one part of it. And it is only one part of it. It's a very important part of it. And we all know that. If you look at all of the surveys that came out, everybody recognizes that we have to get more research going. We need more researchers. So DC, PhDs, mainly because we interpret data differently. We see through a different lens, especially if you've practiced, obviously. You kind of need to practice to see through that different lens. But we need the governance affairs. We have to have the communication both within the profession and to the public so they are aware of this science. But the big thing that drives me is this big data, because as we saw through the pandemic, big data on real people is incredibly powerful. So if we can gather that big data and it exists, most of us are now on electronic records. And, if we can harness that data, we can start to show the world those clinical outcomes from real people. It's like you bypass the whole clinical realm of having to do it in a lab setting, where we test something out, because I think what we've done in those clinical trials, many of the clinical trials that have been done in the past, we threw the baby out with the bathwater. I think that was part of the problem, because it's part of the design. If I can just explain that, like if you run a clinical trial, you sort of have to get everybody with condition Z, whatever condition you're looking at, and no one that has anything else. So you're definitely sure everyone's got condition Z, and then you try chiropractic care on that. But I think actually what we're really influencing is not necessarily a huge amount of impact on condition Z, but those that have subluxations that mimic the symptom patterns of the condition Z. And therein lies the problem. So when we narrow it down to only people that have this condition and nothing else but this condition, you've kind of thrown out all the people that are going to respond to the chiropractic care in the first place. And you only have a slight, tiny little impact, which is still amazing on some people. But like, for example, let me backtrack a little bit. For example, with bedwetting, what's really interesting, there's one clinical trial on kids with bedwetting, and it sort of has this overall tiny effect, but it's significant. But it's like, tiny little effect, whoop-de-doo. But if you actually look at the data, only 25% of the children that got the chiropractic care responded. Only 25%. But that 25% got over 50% better. So if you happen to be one of those kids where the subluxations was interfering with your brain's ability to control your bladder at night, it's a big deal to get checked and adjusted. If you have some other reason for having bedwetting, well, then chiropractic isn't necessarily going to change the bedwetting, but it probably changes everything else. We did a clinical trial in older adults, and we were measuring sensory motor function, but the letters we got from these older adults that were part of that clinical trial that had improvements in all these other weird and wonderful things, Ray, was mind-boggling. We still had major improvements in the clinical trial, but the letters, so we tried to publish all those, several of those letters as well, because it was remarkable changes that these people were having in other symptoms than what we were measuring. But the big data, Ray, the big data that we're trying to get at through the data lake, through the DASH, called Data Aggregation System for Health, there you're going to get those real people, and you're going to be able to measure and monitor their outcomes in real life, seeing real chiropractors. And there's real value in that, because all of a sudden it's like, hey, what are the side effects? So you might feel a bit achy and sore. Okay, what are the positive effects? Oh, and there's this big long list of things that might happen when you get under chiropractic care. Because it's got to come out then.
Yeah, the unanticipated things. Or any of us have been in practice for a while. We might be, God, how many times has this happened? You're treating somebody for some mid-thoracic pain. That's all they're complaining about. And then they tell you 3 weeks later, I haven't had to take an antacid in a month. Well, we don't know that because we didn't ask them up front.
Or they didn't tell you.
What problems are you having, that could be related to that area? And so it's the other thing, the other outcomes that occur that, that we aren't able to pull that data in, but
we don't think about it.
The data lake, that work group has done an amazing job in getting most of our EHR companies to be able to fill that data lake, if you will, with claims data. Well, what happens when you do that? Well, if we own that data, then we can look at what happens to the population that's under chiropractic care, what happens to the population that's not under, what changes do you see in their overall health index, and you can't do that without the data and without the research. And if you think we're ever going to be able to go to, quote, the payers or to the government or policymakers, they don't give a damn what your opinion is. No. They want to know what the outcomes are. And before any money's moved or policies are changed, you got to give them a why. And so that is, because I run in all circles in chiropractic. I am Switzerland, or we attempt to be Switzerland to the degree that that's possible. And the reality is, having been involved in the political side very heavily in our state and to some degree nationally, it is all about the data. Every time I've gone down to our legislature and been pitted against the State Medical Association or whatever other group it was that didn't want to see us do this or do that, if you don't have the data, you're screwed. You just are. So,
and it costs so much to access data like this. And that's why I'm so excited about what we're doing in Chiropractic Future, building this DASH, building this system where we can actually access this data. And we can access then more than just chiropractic data. Like once we know it's working really well, because it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to access this data through other data aggregation systems.
Right.
And we don't have the money, Ray.
Right.
Chiropractic research funding, especially in the US, is so small. There's just no money. And most chiropractors have no idea how much it costs to do a study. Again, it costs like several $100,000 just to do a tiny little basic science study, and usually several million to do a larger clinical trial. But what we can do once we've got this DASH system up and running again is you can run what's called practice-based research network studies, in which case we actually can, access chiropractors via this system and ask, would you be willing to be part of a clinical trial where, they did a big one in Sweden where they looked at the frequency of care after the initial period. So they literally looked at maintenance care. Is it worthwhile people coming in for maintenance care? So part of a big practice-based research network, people were asked to join. And if they joined, they got randomly assigned to either asking their patients to come back, or there was the individual patients that got, they got randomized into either coming back when they hurt or coming back on a maintenance schedule. And the people that got, scheduled as the maintenance schedule, they ended up with less days of pain over a year than the people that came back when they hurt, but they had roughly the same amount of visits. So it's what's coming out of the literature is that chiropractic care is a bit like meditation and exercise. And, again, if you try to bottle exercise, it's the wonder drug of the century. But what's coming out is that the movement of your spinal muscles is actually very important as well. Yoga. And so if you start to see the mechanism slightly differently, it's not necessarily a treatment for this, that, and the other thing, right? Exercise is good for everything. I think what we'll find in this big data is chiropractic is good for everything. You just function better. Your brain's more acutely aware, and so it can fix things.
Feel better, function better. Yep.
Yeah. And I think that's what's going to come out of this big data. But instead of us having to fork out $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 to do this study and that study and that study, once it's up and running, we should be able to pump out comparative data looking at, chiropractic care. I think the beauty is exactly what you were talking about before. All those things, like I remember adjusting my mother, and Mum goes, Heidi, she's been adjusting me. My tinnitus has disappeared. And I said, tinnitus? Yeah, the tinnitus, and there's all this other stuff that is going wrong that they don't think is associated with the spine. And so they don't even bother telling you, even if you ask, And I think some of these things are going to slowly come out, and we're going to be able to look at that big picture. Just like there's these big studies now that can show that, if you exercise, there'll be all-cause mortality decreases, right? I mean, I bet you once we again have that data and the ability with big data sets, we'll probably be able to show that, those under chiropractic care, all-cause mortality goes down. They've done big data studies with opioids, for example, and escalation of care. And the people that see chiropractors they're not the ones that go on to have all the drugs and surgery that is unnecessary and actually shown to be harmful for many back problems, right? So it's really interesting, the few big studies that have been done. And this is, pioneers in the field like Jim Whedon and Brian Anderson. We've actually got Brian Anderson on our research work group as well. And Jim, we're very, very lucky, with where this is going. So I just think it's a real bright future being able to show the world. And I think that will have probably the biggest impact on access to chiropractic care and understanding about the benefits of chiropractic care. It's not just back pain, neck pain, and headaches. There's a whole wellness side, to chiro, which makes sense when you get into the mechanisms. Because what we seem to be doing is enabling the brain to actually perceive what's going on. And I mean, there isn't anything more intelligent in our bodies than our brains, really. And brain awareness, seems to be the reason that you can heal from so many things.
For those of you that aren't familiar with the Chiropractic Future Strategic Plan, go to chirofuture.org. You'll get a glimpse of what all is going on. This is a project.
Chiropracticfuture.org, though, right?
Yes.
Chiropracticfuture.org.
Yeah. Thank you.
Want to do it again? 3, 2, 1.
Yeah. Chiropracticfuture.org. There are basically five pillars with that program. And for those that aren't aware, anybody that's been around this profession a long time has certainly seen the frustrations that we have with where we are kind of in the pecking order in healthcare. And kudos to ICA and ACA for all they've been able to do. But as I've said repeatedly, and I'll keep harping on it, the reason that we can't make more progress than we are is unfortunately only about 25% of the of the chiropractors belong to either association, which means 75% of our resources, our revenue, or to be able to get things done is simply not going anywhere or not going into the profession like it should be. So if moving the profession...
And that to some degree, like we've had a lot of infighting over the years, but I, again, agree with you 100% that the only way forward is if we come together.
It's
not all about research, which is my world, right? But it's about us working together. If we work together, we are so much stronger. And I think that's, again, the reason why I've stayed and worked with this Chiropractic Future organization. It's the team. It's that openness, the willingness to, like, I love our values, right? Transparency, collaboration, and cooperation. Transparency, collaboration, and cooperation. It's working together for a brighter future for everybody, not just, me or you or, yeah. And I really, really believe in that. And that's why I'm still here.
So looking ahead, what's next for you? What's your next research project, or is there one big one that's coming up that that really has you excited?
Oh, there's a lot, Ray. There's a lot coming up. We've got 3 big clinical trials that we've just completed. Again, I've just explained that I work in the basic science world. So what we've been looking at now is in the clinical world, how does the changes in the brain translate to positive outcomes for our patients or not? Does it? And we've published the first paper last year, November last year, 2025. And we've found that 4 weeks of chiropractic care have these dramatic changes in the brain and in the brain circuitry, how the brain talks to itself. And it corresponds with all these good clinical outcomes. Like there was a significant decrease in depression and anxiety, along with decreases in pain and bits and pieces. And I mean, that's a big deal. I think it might be the first clinical trial showing a decrease in anxiety and depression. But mental health is becoming a bigger and bigger problem around the world, right? And I don't know how many chiropractic patients always say they feel better, right? They feel better, they function better, but we haven't measured it. Again, potentially because of the view or the model of how people saw chiropractic in the past. I'm thinking of it as general quality of life and general health and well-being. So we probably design our studies slightly differently. So we've still got 2 other big clinical trials, and the stuff coming out of those, Ray, is unbelievable. We're looking at all these immune outcomes as well, because again, we discovered during the pandemic that there was not a single clinical trial on chiropractic and immune function. Yet there were about 23, 24 basic science studies showing that adjusting the spine impacts these neuroimmune chemicals. So we know there's a connection. We know there's a connection between adjusting the spine and neuroimmune communication and chemicals, but there was no one that had looked at a clinical trials setting. So we've done that. That's coming out. We're doing our first ever baby study. So we're looking at a baby's brain, newborn babies. I don't know if you know about the drama that's been going on in Australia. It was this one health minister that decided that chiropractic was dangerous to babies. She organized the biggest, commission of inquiry ever into the health of children and chiropractic. And there was 99.7% of parents, and there was 25,000 people wrote into this. And they were, all of them, 99.7% were delighted with the chiropractic care. They didn't find a single negative outcome at all for babies, but it's definitely, dangerous and all this, it's bullshit. But anyway, so we're doing this in New Zealand because we can. I know, you'd think down under we're the same, but we're not. 2 different countries. And I've got this beautifully bright chiropractic PhD student doing her whole thesis now on newborn babies. And what's interesting, Ray, and I just got to throw it in there, the trajectory for these children that can't turn their head, can't breastfeed on one side, they might have twistedness in their bodies, their outcomes, health outcomes, there's quite a negative trajectory. So, and this is the typical baby that comes and sees a chiropractor. So I cannot wait to start the study. I mean, if we can, we'll try follow up on these kids, which was well beyond obviously her PhD, but and then there's continuing to work on enlightening the chiropractors and the public on these changes, the science, what really chiropractic is about, how it actually changes your brain's ability to interpret what's going on, and continuing to try and change the future, right? So people get access. I mean, that's the biggest thing to me is everybody deserves access to chiropractic care and have a family chiropractor.
So I have some just for fun questions. Who's your hero and why?
Who's my hero? Jerry Klum was always my hero. I just adored the man. I met him as a student, and yeah, he had this beautiful ability to walk between all of the politics. Like, I just don't get politics, to be perfectly honest, but I'd always used to think I wasn't political, but then friends of mine say, how do you don't understand? You are political. I'm like, oh, well, whatever. But I don't see myself as political. But he had this beautiful ability to communicate with everybody in our profession, outside our profession. And he was so eloquent. I mean, I could never be like that because I swear like a trooper, as you know. But anyway, yeah, I just thought he was a remarkable man to influence, thousands, if not millions of people.
No doubt. And, I don't know anyone who knew Jerry that doesn't feel that way.
Oh, love the man. Love the man. I'd ring him up just for advice,
Yep.
Yeah.
So what talent do you have that most people don't know about?
Oh, I'm a very good mushroom picker in Norway. I know my mushrooms, and I know which ones are edible and which ones are not. And I try to get back to Norway every autumn because I just adore it. And I love the smell, and I love walking in the forest, and I know where the spots are where you find the different kinds of mushrooms. But, that probably people don't know about that.
That is a unique talent. What's the worst job you ever had?
I used to be a cleaner. I used to be a cleaner. And cleaning toilets, not so fun. No.
We call those motivation to go on to chiropractic college or whatever other degree you want to pursue.
Yes, exactly. But I'm actually really delighted that I have worked that job for many, many years. Yeah, it's where I started out. And I just think that's, we're all the same. We're all human beings. Doesn't really matter what we do. And if you don't have, everybody plays a role that's very important. So I like that vitalistic model. And we bring it right into our research center, that we all work to our strengths. Again, you don't really want me anywhere near computers, as you've just discovered, right? So, we have to work to our strengths. And if we work together to our strengths, we can outperform just about anything and anyone. And I believe in that. And that's, again, why I'm part of Chiropractic Future. We've got to work together to our strengths. I am hopeless when it comes to government affairs and things like that. I haven't got a clue. But we can provide the chiro and the science bit, and I can make sure that you get the information you need to, do what needs to be done.
And that's why it's being effective, is because the collaboration between the different pillars, if you will, that are necessary to move the profession forward. Well, thanks for spending some time with us today, Dr. Heidi, and thank you all for listening to the ChiroSphere podcast. Please subscribe and share the podcast with your friends. Let us know who you'd like to hear from in the future or what topics you'd like us to cover, and we'll do our best to deliver. If you want to learn more about ChiroHealth USA and how we can help you develop a compliant, profitable discount strategy that will absolutely grow your practice, your income, and profitability, call us at 888-719-9990 or visit our website at chusa.com, that is CHUSA.com, and find out why ChiroHealth USA is the network that works for chiropractic and you.
And if you want to learn more about chiropractic, go to chiroshub.com.
Chiro what?
Chiros, plural, chiroshub.com. And you can learn more about the science of chiropractic that we've been talking about today. It's available for chiropractors as well.
All right, Heidi. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ray. See ya.